In 1987, a Japanese dive instructor named Kihachiro Aratake was exploring the waters off Yonaguni Island, searching for interesting dive sites to show tourists, when he encountered something that would change his life forever. 25 meters below the surface, in waters that should contain nothing but coral and fish, he found himself staring at what looked like an ancient monument. It wasn't small, wasn't subtle, wasn't something you could mistake for natural formation. This was massive, geometric, impossible to ignore. Enormous stone terraces rose from the ocean floor, carved with perfect right angles, connected by staircases that descended into darkness. The structure stretched over 100 meters long, 50 meters wide, reaching nearly 30 meters in height. This was architecture, unmistakable human construction, sitting where no ancient city should exist, preserved beneath waves for thousands of years. Aratake thought he'd discovered treasure, assumed the Japanese government would celebrate this finding, imagined archaeologists descending immediately to study and preserve this incredible site. He photographed everything, mapped the structure, brought other divers to verify what he was seeing. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, captured on film and video. Mainstream media picked up the story, newspapers ran articles about Japan's Atlantis, television crews filmed documentaries showing the underwater monument. For a brief moment, it seemed like the world was ready to rewrite history, to acknowledge that advanced civilizations existed far earlier than conventional archaeology admitted. Then the academic establishment responded, and the celebration turned into controversy. The structure's features defied natural explanation, showed characteristics that only human engineering produces. There were staircases, perfect steps carved into stone, each one uniform in height and depth. There were platforms, flat surfaces extending dozens of meters, polished smooth like temple floors. There were walls, straight edges that maintained precise angles over long distances. There were tunnels, carved passages that penetrated deep into the rock, leading to interior chambers. There were markings, carved symbols, and patterns that appeared deliberately placed. Every feature suggested intentional construction, purposeful design, sophisticated engineering that required planning and tools. Professor Masaoki Kimura, a marine geologist from Ryukyu University, devoted his career to studying the Yonaguni monument. He conducted hundreds of dives, spending thousands of hours underwater measuring, photographing, mapping every detail. His conclusion was unequivocal, stated clearly in academic papers and interviews. This was a man-made structure, built by an advanced civilization, then submerged when sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age. The evidence was overwhelming, he insisted, the geometry too perfect, the features too numerous, the overall design too coherent to be natural. He identified what appeared to be a stepped pyramid, similar to structures found in Mexico and Central America. He found carved channels, drainage systems that made no sense as natural erosion. He documented tool marks, places where stone had been cut and shaped by instruments. The dating implications were revolutionary, threatening, impossible to reconcile with conventional timelines. The last time Yonaguni was above sea level was approximately 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, during the Ice Age when ocean levels were 120 meters lower than today. If the monument was built on dry land, as it must have been, then it predates the oldest known civilizations by thousands of years. It's older than the pyramids of Egypt, older than Stonehenge, older than the first Sumerian cities. It suggests that advanced civilization existed during the Ice Age, that humans were building monumental architecture while conventional history says we were nomadic hunter-gatherers. This timeline doesn't just challenge academic consensus, it shatters it, requires completely rethinking human development. The academic response was swift, defensive, dismissive in ways that revealed how threatened mainstream archaeology felt. Geologists who had never visited the site, who had never dived to examine the structure firsthand, published papers declaring it natural. They claimed the right angles were products of sedimentary layering, that rock fractures along natural planes creating geometric patterns. They suggested the terraces were erosion features, that wave action over millennia could carve steps and platforms. They dismissed the tunnels as natural caves, the markings as random scratches, the overall structure as coincidental arrangement of naturally formed rocks. None of these explanations addressed the specific features Kimura documented, none accounted for the tool marks or carved symbols, none explained why similar natural formations don't appear anywhere else. The controversy attracted attention from researchers worldwide, from geologists and archaeologists who wanted to examine the evidence personally. Those who dived at Yonaguni, who saw the structure with their own eyes, overwhelmingly concluded it was artificial. The right angles were too precise, the surfaces too flat, the overall design too coherent. Natural formations are irregular, show random variation, lack the systematic organization visible at Yonaguni. The monument had symmetry, repetition, design elements that appear in human architecture across cultures. There were post holes, circular depressions arranged in patterns, suggesting wooden structures once stood on the stone platforms. There were what appeared to be roads, flat pathways connecting different sections, worn smooth as if by foot traffic. The carvings provided the strongest evidence for human construction, features that nature simply cannot produce. There were angular symbols, geometric patterns carved into flat surfaces. There were what appeared to be animal figures, possibly turtles or other creatures significant to the builders. There were straight lines, deliberately incised grooves running for meters across stone faces. These weren't random scratches, weren't natural fracture patterns, weren't effects of erosion or marine life. They were intentional marks, made by tools, serving purposes we can only guess at. Perhaps they were religious symbols, territorial markers, astronomical alignments, or simply decorative elements. What's certain is that they required intelligence, planning, and tool use to create. The political and academic implications of acknowledging Yonaguni as artificial extend beyond simple historical curiosity. If advanced civilization existed 12,000 years ago, if they built monumental architecture comparable to later cultures, then human history requires complete revision. The neat progression from hunter-gatherers to agriculturalists to city builders collapses. The idea that civilization began in Mesopotamia 6,000 years ago becomes obviously wrong. The entire framework that archaeology uses to understand human development, the timeline that appears in every textbook, the narrative that shapes public understanding of our past, all of it needs rebuilding. This isn't just inconvenient, it's professionally catastrophic for scholars who've built careers on orthodox chronologies. The Japanese government's position has been cautiously neutral, neither endorsing nor completely dismissing the structure's significance. They've allowed research to continue, haven't banned access to the site, but also haven't declared it an official archaeological monument or provided substantial funding for systematic excavation. This middle ground satisfies no one but offends no one, avoiding controversy while preventing conclusive resolution. Tourism to Yonaguni has increased dramatically, divers from around the world visit to see the monument personally, but scientific investigation remains limited, sporadic, dependent on individual researchers' dedication rather than institutional support. The monument sits there, patient as only stone can be, waiting 25 meters below the surface for humanity to acknowledge what it represents. Every day, currents wash over the ancient steps, fish swim through the carved tunnels, marine plants grow on surfaces that once knew human feet. The structure doesn't care about academic controversy, doesn't concern itself with threatened paradigms or defensive scholars. It simply exists, solid and geometric and obviously artificial to anyone willing to see. The question isn't whether it's real, anyone can dive down and touch it. The question is whether we have the courage to accept what reality is showing us, whether we can admit that our understanding of human history is incomplete, whether we're willing to acknowledge that advanced civilizations existed thousands of years before we thought possible. Yonaguni is the first piece of evidence, the most dramatic and undeniable, but as we'll see, it's far from alone. Beneath the oceans covering 70% of Earth's surface, beneath waves that rose at the end of the Ice Age, lie the ruins of civilizations we've forgotten, cities that conventional history claims never existed, monuments to human achievement that predate everything we've been taught. The ancient Hindu epic Mahabharata, written thousands of years ago, describes a magnificent city called Dwarka, the golden capital of Lord Krishna. According to the text, this wasn't just any city, it was a marvel of engineering, a fortress of incredible sophistication protected by massive walls and surrounded by harbors. The scripture describes it in vivid detail, streets laid out in perfect grids, palaces made of crystal and silver, gardens with trees bearing precious stones. Krishna ruled from this city, the text says, until his death, at which point the ocean rose and swallowed Dwarka completely, dragging it beneath the waves in a single day. For centuries, scholars dismissed this as pure mythology, as religious allegory not meant to be taken literally, as ancient storytelling with no basis in historical fact. Then marine archaeologists started finding it, piece by piece, exactly where the text said it would be. The search for Dwarka began in the 1980s, when the Indian government authorized marine archaeological surveys along the Gujarat coast. Dr. Sr. Rao, a pioneering underwater archaeologist, led expeditions into the Gulf of Cambay, the region where ancient texts placed Krishna's city. Initial surveys found nothing, diving in murky waters with limited visibility, searching vast areas where centuries of sedimentation could hide anything. The team was about to abandon the search when their sonar detected anomalies, geometric patterns on the seafloor that didn't match natural formations. They marked the locations, returned with better equipment, and began systematic excavation. What they found stunned them, vindicated the ancient texts, and created controversy that persists to this day. 6 meters below the surface, buried under sand and marine growth, the team discovered massive stone walls. These weren't small structures, weren't minor ruins, weren't ambiguous formations that could be natural. These were engineered fortifications, walls made of precisely cut stone blocks, some weighing several tons, fitted together with sophisticated construction techniques. The walls stretched for hundreds of meters, forming what appeared to be defensive perimeter, protection for a city that once stood here. The construction style matched ancient Indian stone working, showed techniques documented in other archaeological sites, but the scale was unprecedented for the supposed time period. The artifacts recovered from the site told stories that mainstream archaeology struggled to accommodate, dated to periods that shouldn't have advanced civilization. Pottery shards were collected, analyzed, and dated using standard archaeological methods. The results placed them at approximately 7,500 to 9,500 years old, far older than the Harappan civilization that supposedly represented India's first urban culture. Jewelry was found, copper and bronze ornaments showing metallurgical sophistication that predated known metalworking timelines. Stone anchors were discovered, massive objects designed for large ships, suggesting maritime trade and seafaring capabilities thousands of years before conventional history acknowledges. Tools, weapons, building materials, all pointed to advanced civilization existing millennia earlier than textbooks claim. The most controversial dating came from wooden samples recovered from structural elements, from posts and beams that once supported buildings. Wood is ideal for carbon dating, organic material that provides relatively precise chronological information. The samples were sent to multiple laboratories, tested independently to ensure accuracy. The results were consistent, troubling, impossible to reconcile with standard chronologies. The wood dated to approximately 9,500 years ago, placing Dwarka's construction in the same era as Yonaguni's submersion, suggesting global pattern of advanced civilization at the end of the Ice Age. This wasn't just challenging conventional Indian history, it was threatening the entire framework of how we understand human cultural development. The Indian government's initial response was celebration, press conferences announcing the discovery, statements calling it the greatest archaeological finding in modern Indian history. The discovery validated sacred texts, proved that Hindu scriptures contained actual history, demonstrated that ancient Indian civilization was more advanced and older than Western scholars had acknowledged. National pride swelled, religious groups celebrated, and funding flowed to continue excavations. For a brief period, it seemed like Dwarka would force academic institutions worldwide to revise their timelines, to acknowledge that Indian civilization predated Mesopotamia, to rewrite the story of human cultural origins. Then something changed, the enthusiasm cooled, the press conferences stopped, and official silence descended. The reasons are complex, political, and revealing about how historical narratives are controlled. Some scholars pointed out that if Dwarka was real and ancient, it created awkward questions about the Mahabharata's other claims, particularly the descriptions of advanced weapons and flying machines. If the city was real, maybe the wars described were real, maybe the weapons existed. This opened doors to ancient nuclear warfare theories, to suggestions that previous civilizations possessed technology we've only recently rediscovered. Religious fundamentalists might use the evidence to support literal scriptural interpretation, creating political problems in India's complex religious landscape. International archaeological establishment reacted with predictable skepticism, questioning the dating methods, suggesting contamination of samples, proposing alternative explanations that kept Dwarka within acceptable chronologies. The criticisms weren't entirely unfounded. Underwater archaeology is challenging, contamination is possible, and dating ancient submerged sites involves complications. But the pattern of criticism revealed bias, a determination to explain away rather than investigate, to dismiss rather than engage. Papers challenging the Dwarka dating were published in prestigious journals, while papers supporting it were rejected. Researchers defending the early dates found funding difficult to obtain, their work marginalized as fringe archaeology. The underwater city covers a vast area, only a tiny fraction of which has been systematically explored and excavated. The walls discovered represent perhaps 1% of the total site, foundations of a much larger urban complex still buried beneath sand and silt. Ground-penetrating sonar surveys suggest structures extending for kilometers, organized in patterns consistent with planned city layout. There appear to be major buildings near the center, possibly temples or administrative structures, surrounded by residential districts. The harbor area shows evidence of sophisticated docking facilities, breakwaters to protect ships, and what might be warehouse districts for storing trade goods. The question of why Dwarka was abandoned, why it ended up underwater, connects to the same sea level rise that submerged Yonaguni and other Ice Age coastal settlements. At the end of the last glacial maximum, approximately 12,000 years ago, melting ice sheets caused oceans to rise dramatically over several thousand years. This wasn't a single catastrophic flood but a series of rises, periodic surges as ice dams collapsed releasing enormous volumes of meltwater. Coastal cities would have experienced this as repeated flooding, each one worse than the last, forcing populations to retreat inland or adapt to changing shorelines. Eventually, the cities were abandoned, left to be swallowed by advancing seas, their locations forgotten as populations relocated and generations passed. The Mahabharata's description of Dwarka being swallowed by the ocean in a single day might preserve memory of a particularly catastrophic flooding event, perhaps a tsunami triggered by underwater landslide or a rapid ice sheet collapse creating sudden sea level jump. These events did occur during the deglaciation period. Geological evidence confirms massive sudden floods in various regions. What to us appears as gradual sea level rise over millennia would have included punctuated episodes of rapid change, moments when the ocean advanced meters or tens of meters in hours or days. To people living through such events, it would indeed seem like the ocean was swallowing their city, like divine punishment or cosmic catastrophe. The parallels between Dwarka and Yonaguni are striking, impossible to ignore when examined side by side. Both are submerged structures from approximately the same era, both show sophisticated construction techniques, both date to periods when conventional archaeology says only primitive hunter-gatherers existed. Both have been dismissed or downplayed by mainstream academia, both create uncomfortable questions about established timelines. The distance between them, thousands of kilometers across the Indian Ocean, suggests these weren't isolated cultures but potentially part of larger network, maritime civilization that thrived along Ice Age coastlines now submerged. If two such sites have been found, how many remain undiscovered, buried under centuries of sediment in waters too deep or murky for easy exploration? The religious significance of Dwarka's discovery cannot be separated from its archaeological implications, particularly in India where the Mahabharata holds sacred status. For devout Hindus, finding Krishna's city validates their faith, proves their scriptures contain historical truth, demonstrates that their traditions preserve accurate knowledge of ancient times. This makes objective archaeological assessment politically fraught. Any questioning of dates or interpretations can be seen as attack on religion. Conversely, uncritical acceptance of every claim risks mixing genuine archaeological evidence with religious mythology, making it harder to determine what's historically real versus what's spiritual allegory. The truth likely lies somewhere between skeptical dismissal and complete literal interpretation, with real cities and events forming the basis for later religious elaboration. The site remains active, divers continue exploring, and new discoveries are announced periodically. Recent expeditions have found additional structures, identified what appears to be a temple complex, and recovered more artifacts that await proper analysis and publication. But the pace is frustratingly slow, funding is limited, and systematic excavation is hampered by difficult diving conditions and regulatory restrictions. The truth about Dwarka, about when it was built and by whom, about how it relates to other ancient civilizations, remains partially submerged, waiting like the city itself for someone to bring it fully into the light. What's certain is that it exists, that it's older than conventional Indian history allows, that it validates aspects of ancient texts scholars dismissed as fiction, and that it represents another piece of evidence that human civilization is far older, far more sophisticated, and far more mysterious than we've been taught to believe. In 2001, the Indian National Institute of Ocean Technology was conducting routine pollution surveys in the Gulf of Cambay, using side-scan sonar to map the seafloor and identify contamination sources. The team expected to find mud, sediment, perhaps some modern debris from shipping activity. Instead, their sonar equipment detected something extraordinary, something that shouldn't exist according to conventional archaeology. At a depth of approximately 40 meters, the sonar revealed geometric patterns, regular shapes arranged in organized grids, structures extending for 9 kilometers along the ancient riverbed. The images showed what appeared to be streets, building foundations, large rectangular structures arranged in urban planning patterns. This wasn't natural geology, wasn't random underwater formations. This was a city, complete and intact, preserved beneath the waves. The discovery sent shockwaves through the archaeological community, prompted immediate skepticism and defensive reactions from mainstream scholars. A city 9 kilometers long would have housed hundreds of thousands of people, represented advanced civilization with sophisticated organization and engineering. Finding such a city dating to the period when sonar surveys suggested, approximately 9,500 years ago, would demolish established chronologies completely. It would prove that urban civilization existed for 1,000 years before Sumeria, before Egypt, before any culture that textbooks identify as first. The implications were too vast, too threatening, too revolutionary for easy acceptance. So the attacks began, questioning the equipment, the interpretation, the motives of researchers who dared suggest something so radical. The sonar images themselves are compelling, difficult to dismiss as equipment error or misinterpretation when examined by experts. The patterns show clear organization, rectangular structures with regular spacing suggesting urban planning. There are what appear to be major thoroughfares, wide pathways running through the complex, connecting different districts. There are smaller streets branching off at right angles, creating grid patterns typical of planned cities. There are larger structures near what might be the city center, buildings with different footprints suggesting different functions, perhaps temples, administrative buildings, or public facilities. The overall layout resembles ancient cities found on land, shows the same organizational principles that appear in Harappan sites, in Mesopotamian cities, in urban centers across the ancient world. The artifact recovery began cautiously, using remote-operated vehicles to collect samples from the seafloor without disturbing the overall site. The first items brought up were pieces of wood, structural elements from what appeared to be buildings or ships. These were perfect for carbon dating, organic material that could provide definitive chronological information. The samples were sent to laboratories in India and abroad, tested using standard radiocarbon dating protocols. The results came back consistent across multiple labs, dated with reasonable precision. The wood was approximately 9,500 years old, placing it in the pre-pottery Neolithic period, a time when humans supposedly lived in small nomadic groups without permanent settlements. Additional artifacts provided context, suggested this wasn't simply a natural wood deposit but actual human habitation. Pottery shards were recovered, showing manufacturing techniques and decorative patterns. The pottery was primitive by later standards but represented ceramic technology that shouldn't exist at this early date according to conventional timelines. Stone tools were found, well-crafted implements showing sophisticated understanding of lithic technology. Beads and ornaments appeared, personal decoration suggesting cultural sophistication beyond basic survival needs. Each artifact independently confirmed the chronology, each piece of evidence pointed to the same impossible conclusion. Advanced human society existed in the Gulf of Cambay 9,500 years ago, built cities with urban planning, practiced crafts and arts, engaged in activities that defined civilization. The geological context supports the dating, explains how a coastal city ended up 40 meters underwater through natural sea level changes. During the last ice age, approximately 20,000 years ago, ocean levels were 120 meters lower than today. The Gulf of Cambay didn't exist as water body, it was a river valley, fertile land with the Saraswati and other rivers flowing through it. This was prime real estate for ancient peoples, river valleys with fresh water, fertile soil, access to marine resources along the Ice Age coastline. As the ice sheets melted between 15,000 and 6,000 years ago, sea levels rose gradually but steadily, eventually flooding the river valleys and creating the modern Gulf. The city would have been on dry land during construction, slowly threatened by encroaching seas, eventually abandoned as flooding made it uninhabitable. The Indian government's response to the Gulf of Cambay discovery was initially supportive, recognizing the potential significance and authorizing additional surveys. Marine archaeologists were given funding to conduct more detailed sonar mapping, to recover more artifacts, to begin systematic documentation of the site. International interest was intense, research institutions worldwide wanted to participate, journalists descended to cover what could be the archaeological discovery of the century. Press conferences were held, official statements were issued, and for a brief moment it seemed like the world would acknowledge this revolutionary finding. Then the political complications emerged, the bureaucratic obstacles appeared, and the project ground to a halt. The complications were partly technical. The diving conditions in the Gulf of Cambay are extremely challenging. The water is murky, visibility rarely exceeds a few meters, making photography and detailed examination difficult. Strong currents sweep through the area, creating dangerous diving conditions and constantly shifting sediment that can bury artifacts. The depth of 40 meters isn't extreme for modern diving but limits bottom time and requires careful decompression procedures. These challenges made systematic archaeological excavation difficult and expensive, requiring specialized equipment and highly trained personnel. But technical difficulties alone don't explain why the project was effectively shut down, why funding dried up, why access became restricted. The political complications involve territorial disputes, religious sensitivities, and academic politics that conspired to bury the evidence along with the city. The Gulf of Cambay is a strategically sensitive area, close to Pakistan border, subject to ongoing territorial negotiations. Establishing ancient settlements in the region could complicate these negotiations, create new claims about historical ownership and cultural heritage. Religious groups had concerns about what the discovery might mean, whether it validated or challenged specific scriptural interpretations, whether it would empower certain factions or undermine others. The archaeological establishment, both in India and internationally, had obvious interests in preventing acceptance of dates that would require rewriting textbooks and acknowledging that previous chronologies were fundamentally wrong. By 2003, just 2 years after the discovery, the project was effectively terminated. No official cancellation was announced, no formal decision to halt research was published. Instead, funding quietly stopped being renewed, permits became increasingly difficult to obtain, and bureaucratic obstacles multiplied. Researchers who wanted to continue investigating found themselves reassigned to other projects, their applications for Gulf of Cambay access delayed indefinitely or denied without explanation. The international participants were thanked for their contributions and told the site needed to be protected from excessive investigation until proper protocols could be established. Those protocols were never established, the site remains off-limits, and systematic archaeological examination has never resumed. The artifacts that were recovered, the physical evidence that proved the site's age and significance, have largely disappeared from public view. Some are supposedly in museum storage, awaiting proper conservation and analysis that never occurs. Others were sent to laboratories for testing and were never returned, lost in bureaucratic confusion or deliberately misplaced. The sonar data, the detailed maps showing the city layout, remain in government archives with restricted access. Researchers who want to examine this data, who seek permission to publish detailed analysis, find their requests denied or ignored. The evidence exists, it was documented, it was dated, but it's been effectively removed from scientific discourse. The few researchers who continue advocating for the Gulf of Cambay site, who insist its significance deserves recognition, find themselves marginalized professionally. They're labeled as fringe archaeologists, accused of making extraordinary claims without extraordinary evidence, criticized for challenging established chronologies. The irony is obvious, the evidence was extraordinary, multiple independent dating methods confirmed the age, the sonar images clearly showed artificial structures. But extraordinary evidence that challenges paradigms gets dismissed, while ordinary evidence that confirms established narratives gets accepted uncritically. The scientific method supposedly follows evidence wherever it leads, but institutional science follows evidence only when it leads to comfortable destinations. The Gulf of Cambay discovery remains in limbo, neither officially acknowledged nor completely debunked, existing in uncomfortable middle ground where it can't be discussed seriously without professional risk. The city lies beneath the waves, undisturbed since research stopped, slowly degrading as currents and marine life work on structures that have already survived 9,500 years. With modern technology, with proper funding and institutional support, the site could be thoroughly documented, its true nature and significance definitively established. But that won't happen, not while powerful interests prefer comfortable myths over uncomfortable truths, not while career incentives reward conformity over discovery, not while the guardian institutions of knowledge prioritize paradigm protection over truth-seeking. The ancient city waits in darkness, patient as only ruins can be, holding secrets about human history that we're apparently not yet ready to learn. In September 1968, a pilot flying over the shallow waters near North Bimini Island in the Bahamas noticed something unusual below the surface. From the air, he could see what appeared to be a road or pathway, straight geometric patterns in the seafloor that looked deliberately constructed rather than naturally formed. The discovery was particularly remarkable because just 2 years earlier, the famous psychic Edgar Cayce had made a prediction that would seem impossible to fulfill through normal means. Cayce, who died in 1945, had stated in 1940 that portions of Atlantis would begin to rise near Bimini in 1968 or 1969. The timing seemed too precise to be coincidence, too specific to be lucky guess, and it drew immediate attention from archaeologists, treasure hunters, and believers in lost civilizations. The Bimini Road, as it came to be called, consists of limestone blocks arranged in a remarkably straight line extending approximately 800 meters along the seafloor. The blocks are rectangular, roughly uniform in size, fitted together with minimal gaps between them. Some are massive, weighing several tons, others are smaller but still precisely shaped. The arrangement isn't random, isn't the chaotic scatter you'd expect from natural processes. The blocks form what appears to be a constructed pathway or foundation, possibly a road for land transportation or a harbor structure for maritime activities. The depth varies from about 4 to 6 meters below the surface, shallow enough for snorkeling but deep enough that the structures would have been built when sea levels were lower, when this area was above water or just at the shoreline. The debate about Bimini Road centers on a fundamental question that divides researchers into hostile camps. Is this a natural geological formation, limestone beach rock that fractured along natural plains creating geometric patterns that merely look artificial? Or is this a human construction, an ancient road or harbor built by advanced civilization and then submerged when sea levels rose? The geological explanation seems reasonable on surface examination. Beach rock does form in tropical waters, limestone does fracture along predictable lines creating rectangular blocks. But this explanation requires accepting that nature created an 800-meter-long structure with consistent orientation, uniform block sizes, and perpendicular corners, all by coincidence. The geologists who argue for natural formation point to other examples of beach rock in the Caribbean, limestone formations that fractured and settled into patterns that can look organized. They explain that wave action and tidal forces can arrange rocks in linear patterns, that erosion can create straight edges, that what looks like precise construction is actually selective observation seeing patterns where none exist. They published papers dismissing Bimini Road as textbook example of natural beach rock formation, warned against reading significance into geological processes, and criticized researchers who suggested otherwise as promoting pseudoscience. The tone of these papers is revealing, defensive and dismissive rather than genuinely curious, determined to debunk rather than investigate. The archaeologists and researchers who argue for artificial construction counter with specific features that natural formation cannot explain. The blocks underneath the visible surface layer, discovered by excavating the sand, show this isn't a single layer of fractured rock but multiple courses, construction technique involving stacked materials. The edges show evidence of shaping, places where stone appears to have been worked with tools rather than fractured naturally. The corners include what appear to be pillar stones, larger blocks positioned at right angles marking where the road changes direction. The overall structure shows design coherence, intentional planning, purposeful construction that goes beyond what random natural processes produce. The dating controversy surrounding Bimini Road is as contentious as the question of its origin. If it's natural beach rock, its age is irrelevant. Geological formations can be any age without historical significance. But if it's artificial, determining when it was built becomes crucial for understanding what civilization created it. The last time sea levels were low enough for this area to be above water, suitable for construction, was approximately 10,000 to 12,000 years ago during the final stages of the Ice Age. This places Bimini Road in the same time period as Yonaguni and the Gulf of Cambay sites, suggesting global pattern of coastal construction followed by inundation. But this dating is inferred from sea level data rather than direct testing of the structures, making it subject to challenge and reinterpretation. The Edgar Cayce prediction adds layer of mystery that both helps and hinders serious investigation. Cayce's accuracy about timing and location seems impossible to explain through conventional means, lending credence to those who believe Bimini Road is part of Atlantis. But his psychic claims also attract skepticism, make the site seem less credible to mainstream scientists who dismiss anything associated with paranormal predictions. The question is whether Cayce actually had genuine precognitive abilities, whether he accessed real information through unconventional means, or whether the timing was extraordinary coincidence. Regardless of how he knew, he did state the location and timeframe precisely, which demand some explanation beyond pure chance. The Atlantis connection is inevitable. Plato's description of the lost civilization places it somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The Bahamas fit this general location, sit in the Atlantic west of Gibraltar, and show evidence of submersion that matches Plato's account of Atlantis sinking beneath the waves. Believers in Atlantis point to Bimini Road as proof, physical evidence that advanced civilization existed in the Atlantic, built structures that are now underwater, and matches the geographical descriptions in ancient texts. Skeptics dismiss this as wishful thinking, finding what you want to find, connecting dots that shouldn't be connected. But the correlation is undeniable even if its interpretation remains debated. Additional structures near Bimini strengthen the case for intentional construction beyond single road. There are other linear stone formations in the area, parallel lines suggesting multiple roads or a complex harbor system. There are circular formations, arrangements of stones in geometric patterns that don't match natural geology. There are what appear to be foundation walls, straight lines of stones buried under sand that may indicate building platforms. The entire area shows evidence of extensive construction, systematic organization of stone materials, patterns that become more obvious when mapped comprehensively rather than examining individual features in isolation. The tourism and treasure hunting that Bimini Road attracts has both helped and hindered serious research. Divers visit regularly, take photos and videos, share experiences that keep public awareness high and prevent the site from being completely ignored. But treasure hunters have disturbed the site, moved stones searching for artifacts, disrupted whatever archaeological context existed. Commercial interests profit from the mystery, promoting Bimini Road as Atlantis regardless of evidence, creating sensational narratives that make serious investigation seem less credible. The site needs systematic archaeological examination by credentialed professionals using proper documentation methods, but funding and permits for such work remain difficult to obtain. The underwater excavations that have occurred, limited and unofficial as they were, found additional evidence supporting artificial construction. Beneath the visible road surface, excavators discovered what appears to be a second course of stones, building technique involving multiple layers. They found stones positioned as if supporting vertical pillars, architectural elements suggesting structures stood on this foundation. They recovered what might be tool marks, places where stone surfaces show evidence of working. These findings were documented with photographs but never published in peer-reviewed journals, remaining in grey literature of expedition reports and conference presentations rather than entering mainstream archaeological discourse. The academic resistance to investigating Bimini Road thoroughly reveals institutional bias against challenging conventional chronologies. If serious archaeological teams examined the site, if geological experts honestly assessed the evidence, if radiocarbon dating was attempted on organic materials trapped in the structure, we could resolve the debate definitively. But that investigation isn't happening, permits are difficult to obtain, funding goes to safer projects, and careers aren't built by proving mainstream archaeology wrong. The site remains controversial, disputed, existing in limbo between natural formation and ancient construction, between geological curiosity and revolutionary evidence. The truth lies beneath meters of water, waiting for someone with resources and courage to definitively document what's there, to establish once and for all whether we're looking at random rocks or at the remnants of Atlantis, whether Edgar Cayce was lucky or prescient, whether our understanding of ancient history is correct or fundamentally incomplete. The Mediterranean Sea holds secrets that conventional history has only begun to acknowledge, cities that thrived in antiquity and then vanished beneath the waves. Unlike the controversial sites at Yonaguni or Bimini, these sunken Mediterranean cities are undisputed, fully accepted by mainstream archaeology, extensively documented and studied. They provide proof of concept, demonstrating that major urban centers can indeed be submerged, that advanced civilizations can be lost underwater, that what seems impossible about ancient sunken cities has demonstrable historical precedent. Heracleion and Canopus, twin cities of ancient Egypt, disappeared for over 1,000 years, became legends that people assumed were myths, until French marine archaeologist Frank Goddio found them in the year 2000 exactly where ancient texts said they would be. Heracleion was ancient Egypt's greatest port city, the gateway through which all Mediterranean trade flowed into the Egyptian heartland. Ancient historians described it as magnificent, wealthy beyond imagination, filled with temples and palaces and merchant warehouses. The city controlled access to the Nile Delta, collected tariffs on all goods entering Egypt, served as cultural crossroads where Greek, Egyptian, and Near Eastern civilizations mixed. But sometime around the 8th century CE, perhaps earlier, Heracleion vanished. Earthquakes and sea level changes caused the city to sink into Abu Qir Bay, its buildings toppling into the Mediterranean, its treasures buried under sand and silt. Within generations, its location was forgotten, its very existence questioned, dismissed as exaggeration or invention by historians who couldn't find any trace. Frank Goddio's discovery of Heracleion vindicated the ancient sources, proved that cities described in classical texts really existed even when physical evidence disappeared completely. His team used sophisticated side-scan sonar and magnetometers to map the seafloor, detecting anomalies that indicated buried structures. Divers confirmed what instruments suggested, finding colossal statues, temple columns, hieroglyphic inscriptions, all the evidence of major Egyptian city lying beneath meters of water and sediment. The finds were spectacular, museum-quality artifacts in incredible condition, preserved by being buried quickly rather than slowly degrading on land. Massive statues of pharaohs and gods, some over 5 meters tall, emerged from the Mediterranean intact. The temple complexes discovered at Heracleion showed the city's religious importance, its role as center for worship of Egyptian gods while maintaining Greek cultural influences. The main temple dedicated to Amun-Jereb, a form of the god Amun specifically associated with this region, covered vast area with multiple structures, courtyards, and ceremonial spaces. Greek inscriptions alongside Egyptian hieroglyphs demonstrated the cultural mixing that occurred in Heracleion, the blending of civilizations that made it unique. Goddio's team found votive offerings, religious objects deposited by worshippers, providing insight into the spiritual life of this vanished city. The ships discovered in Heracleion's harbor added dimension to understanding ancient maritime technology and trade networks. Several large vessels, merchant ships that once carried goods between Egypt and Mediterranean world, lay preserved in harbor sediments. These weren't small boats but substantial cargo vessels, showing sophisticated shipbuilding techniques and confirming that ancient peoples conducted extensive maritime trade. The ships contained remains of their cargoes, amphorae filled with wine or oil, luxury goods from across the ancient world, physical evidence of the commerce that made Heracleion wealthy and important. But here's where Heracleion's story becomes relevant to the controversial earlier sites, where mainstream archaeology's comfortable acceptance of this sunken city creates problems for its rejection of others. Some structures at Heracleion date earlier than the conventional timeline for the city's founding, showing construction techniques and architectural styles that predate the period when historians say the city was built. These anomalous structures are explained away as reused materials, as earlier foundations that later builders incorporated, as misidentified or misdated elements. The explanations sound reasonable until you recognize the pattern, the same defensive rationalization that appears whenever physical evidence challenges established chronologies. The dating discrepancies at Heracleion aren't as dramatic as at Yonaguni or the Gulf of Cambay. We're talking centuries rather than millennia of potential error. But they establish important precedent, demonstrating that mainstream archaeology's dates for site construction aren't always reliable, that physical evidence sometimes contradicts accepted timelines, that revision is necessary when new data emerges. If Heracleon's dates require adjustment when confronted with evidence, why shouldn't dates for other submerged sites face similar scrutiny? The principle is identical even if the magnitude differs. Canopus, Heracleon's sister city located nearby, showed similar patterns of submersion and preservation. Ancient sources described Canopus as even more decadent than Heracleion, a resort city where wealthy Egyptians and Greeks came for entertainment and pleasure. Its temples were renowned throughout the ancient world, its festivals attracted pilgrims from distant lands, its position at the Nile mouth made it strategically crucial. Like Heracleion, it sank into the Mediterranean, was forgotten, became legend. Godio's team found it along with Heracleion, discovered two lost cities simultaneously, proving that major urban centers can vanish completely for over 1,000 years and then be rediscovered exactly where ancient texts located them. The preservation conditions in Mediterranean Sea differ significantly from those at controversial Pacific and Indian Ocean sites, and this difference affects how archaeology interprets them. The Mediterranean is relatively calm, sedimentation rates are predictable, visibility is often good, and water temperatures moderate. These conditions make systematic archaeological excavation feasible, allow detailed documentation, and enable recovery of artifacts that prove a site's age and nature. The Gulf of Cambay and similar locations have murky water, strong currents, deep sedimentation, and challenging dive conditions that make comparable documentation difficult. But difficult conditions don't mean the sites aren't real, don't invalidate evidence collected under challenging circumstances. The question that Heracleion and Canopus raise for conventional archaeology is one of consistency and intellectual honesty. If we accept that major Egyptian cities disappeared underwater, remained hidden for over a millennium, and were dismissed as legends until physical evidence proved them real, why reject the possibility that older cities experience similar fate? If classical cities from 2,000 years ago can vanish completely beneath the waves, why couldn't Ice Age cities from 10,000 years ago do the same? The principle of cities being submerged and forgotten is established, accepted, demonstrated. Extending this principle backward in time requires no new assumptions, just applying established patterns to earlier periods. The argument from mainstream archaeology is that Heracleion and Canopus are special cases, cities that sank recently due to specific local geological conditions rather than global sea level rise. This is partially true, earthquakes and subsidence contributed to these cities' submersion, making their sinking more rapid and localized than the gradual flooding that followed the Ice Age. But this distinction doesn't eliminate the broader point. Cities can sink, civilizations can vanish, major urban centers can be completely forgotten, and physical evidence can be buried beyond easy discovery. All of these principles that apply to Heracleion apply equally to claims about earlier submerged civilizations. The Mediterranean holds many more sunken sites beyond Heracleion and Canopus, ancient harbors and settlements discovered through underwater archaeology. Pavlopetri off the coast of Greece, dated to approximately 5,000 years ago, shows complete city layout preserved underwater. Port Royal in Jamaica, though more recent, demonstrates how quickly and completely a thriving city can sink, how natural disasters can bury entire urban centers in moments. Alexandria's ancient harbor contains palaces and temples from Cleopatra's era, structures that slid into the Mediterranean following earthquakes. Each discovery demonstrates that underwater cities are real, that they exist in significant numbers, that looking beneath the waves reveals history's hidden chapters. The technology for discovering and documenting underwater sites has advanced dramatically in recent decades, enabling finds that were impossible earlier. Side-scan sonar can map huge areas quickly, magnetometers detect metal objects buried under sediment, sub-bottom profilers reveal structures concealed below the seafloor. Remotely operated vehicles allow exploration of depths too dangerous for human divers. Underwater photography captures details with clarity impossible just years ago. These technologies are revealing that the ocean floor contains far more archaeological sites than previously imagined, that coastal regions now submerged once hosted thriving civilizations, that vast territories of human habitation were flooded when Ice Age coastlines disappeared. The implications extend beyond specific sites to fundamentally reconsidering where we search for ancient civilizations. If 80 of ancient humans lived within 10 kilometers of coastlines, and if those coastlines are now 120 meters underwater, then we've been searching in the wrong places for evidence of early civilization. Inland sites that archaeology has focused on represent refugee populations, people who fled rising seas or who lived in marginal territories unsuitable for advanced culture. The real centers of Ice Age civilization, the cities and ports and trade hubs, are all underwater now, inaccessible to traditional archaeology, preserved but hidden beneath meters of water and centuries of marine sedimentation. Heraclean demonstrates this principle perfectly, a major city completely lost because it ended up underwater, forgotten because nobody thought to look beneath the waves until recently. How many Heracleans from the Ice Age remain undiscovered? How many lost civilizations wait beneath the oceans? How much of human history lies submerged and forgotten because we've been looking only on land? Beyond the prominently debated sites of Yonaguni, Dwarka, the Gulf of Cambay, and Bimini, the world's oceans harbor a multitude of other enigmatic discoveries, each contributing to a compelling, albeit still debated, narrative of human history far more ancient and complex than conventional archaeology readily acknowledges. These findings, often less publicized but equally significant, span across various continents and marine environments, collectively challenging the established timelines of civilization. They represent scattered fragments of a vast, submerged tapestry, hinting at forgotten eras when humanity may have possessed advanced capabilities long before the traditionally accepted dawn of urban societies. In the Mediterranean Sea, a region frequently plundered and explored, the continued emergence of sunken cities provides irrefutable proof of concept. While Heraclean and Canopus are now well documented and accepted, they are far from isolated examples. Off the coast of Greece, near the Peloponnese, lies Pavlopetri, a remarkably preserved city submerged in shallow waters. Discovered in 1967 and subsequently mapped in detail, Pavlopetri is estimated to be approximately 5,000 years old, dating back to the Minoan and Mycenaean periods. Its layout is incredibly complete, featuring streets, buildings, courtyards, and even tombs, all frozen in time beneath the waves. The sophisticated urban planning, evident in its grid-like structure and organized infrastructure, speaks to a highly developed society. The city submergence is attributed to seismic activity and subsequent sea level changes, offering a tangible example of a thriving urban center lost to the sea, a precedent that lends credence to the idea that much older cities could have suffered a similar fate. The sheer scale and preservation of Pavlopetri demonstrate that entire civilizations, not just isolated structures, can indeed vanish beneath the ocean, waiting millennia to be rediscovered. Further afield, off the coast of Malta, divers have reported large, perfectly cut stone blocks and linear arrangements that do not appear to be natural. Malta itself is home to some of the world's oldest freestanding structures, monumental temples like those at Gantija and Hagar Kim, predating the Egyptian pyramids. The discovery of potential underwater structures near an island already renowned for its ancient megalithic culture sparks intriguing questions. Could these submerged formations be related to the same enigmatic builders? Were they part of a larger, now submerged complex connected to Malta's astonishing prehistoric heritage? These reports, while requiring further systematic investigation, add to the global pattern of anomalous underwater stonework. Similarly, in the waters surrounding Sardinia, particularly off the southwestern coast, sonar surveys and anecdotal accounts from local fishermen have hinted at large, rectilinear structures, straight lines, and geometric patterns on the seafloor. These formations, unlike typical natural rock outcrops, suggest deliberate alignment and construction. The island of Sardinia itself has a rich ancient history, including the Nuragic civilization with its unique megalithic towers, nuraghi, and sophisticated water management systems. The possibility of submerged precursors or contemporary coastal settlements associated with these ancient Sardinian cultures, now lying beneath the waves, adds another layer to the puzzle of ancient maritime activities. These diverse and geographically widespread findings are not merely coincidental, they gain increasing credibility and detail thanks to revolutionary advancements in underwater archaeological technology. The era of relying solely on divers with limited vision and tools is gradually giving way to a new age of precision and efficiency in marine exploration. Sidescan sonar, for instance, has become an indispensable tool. It emits sound pulses sideways, across the seafloor, creating detailed acoustic images that reveal topography and anomalies. Unlike traditional sonar, which provides only depth information, sidescan sonar can see objects and structures on the seabed, identifying regular shapes, abrupt changes in texture, or protruding features that betray artificial origins. This technology was crucial in the initial detection of the Gulf of Cambay City and in mapping extensive areas of Heraclean and Canopus. Its ability to cover vast expanses quickly and effectively allows researchers to pinpoint areas of interest for further, more intensive investigation, minimizing the time and resources needed for human divers. Magnetometers are another critical piece of equipment. These devices detect minute variations in the Earth's magnetic field. Since human activity often leaves a magnetic signature, e.g., from fired pottery, metal objects, or even disturbed sediments, magnetometers can identify buried archaeological features that are invisible to optical or acoustic methods. This has been instrumental in locating shipwrecks and submerged structures that are completely covered by sand or mud, providing a powerful X-ray vision for the seabed. Sub-bottom profilers, SBP, take this a step further by using low-frequency sound waves to penetrate the seafloor, revealing stratigraphy and buried structures beneath the surface. An SBP can create cross-sectional images of the sediment layers, allowing archaeologists to identify buried foundations, walls, or even entire building complexes that lie many meters below the modern seabed. This technology is vital for understanding the context and depth of burial of submerged sites, offering clues about the forces and timescales involved in their submergence. For sites like the Gulf of Cambay, where structures are deeply buried, SBP technology is essential for confirming the presence of extensive urban layouts before any physical excavation. The advent of remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, and autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, has fundamentally transformed the capabilities of underwater archaeology. ROVs, tethered to a surface vessel and controlled by operators, can explore depths too dangerous or prolonged for human divers. Equipped with high-definition cameras, powerful lighting, sonar, and sometimes even robotic manipulator arms for sample collection, ROVs provide invaluable visual documentation and precise sampling capabilities. AUVs, on the other hand, operate autonomously, following pre-programmed survey paths, collecting vast amounts of data over extended periods without direct human intervention. These robotic explorers can work in extreme conditions, such as deep-sea trenches or highly turbid waters, pushing the boundaries of what is possible in marine archaeology. The detailed photographic and video evidence gathered by these vehicles provides objective proof of the geometric precision and artificial nature of many submerged structures, bolstering arguments for human construction. Furthermore, advances in dating techniques continue to refine our ability to accurately assess the age of submerged sites. While carbon-14 dating on organic materials, wood, shells, charcoal remains a cornerstone, complementary methods such as thermoluminescence dating for ceramics and optically stimulated luminescence (OSL) dating for sediments offer additional layers of verification. The development of robust protocols for avoiding contamination in underwater environments is also crucial for validating the dates obtained from submerged artifacts. The increasingly consistent results from multiple independent dating methods across diverse geographical locations strengthen the case for a shared chronological window for these enigmatic structures, predominantly at the end of the last ice age. These technologies are not merely tools, they are paradigms in themselves, expanding the scope and ambition of underwater archaeology. They are revealing that the ocean floor contains far more archaeological sites than previously imagined, demonstrating that coastal regions now submerged once hosted thriving civilizations. They force us to confront the reality that vast territories of human habitation were flooded when the Ice Age coastlines disappeared, and that our understanding of ancient history is profoundly incomplete if we limit our search to dry land alone. The systematic application of these advanced technologies is slowly but surely pulling back the veil from a lost chapter of human civilization, urging a fundamental reassessment of our past. The consistent pattern of sophisticated submerged structures, recurrently dated to the transitional period at the end of the last ice age roughly between 10,000 and 12,000 years ago, transcends the realm of mere archaeological anomalies. It coalesces into a compelling argument for the existence of a widespread, possibly interconnected, pre-glacial maritime civilization. This hypothesis directly challenges the conventional narrative of human development, which typically places the emergence of complex societies, urban centers, and monumental architecture much later, primarily in the river valleys of Mesopotamia and Egypt, around 6,000 years ago. During the last glacial maximum, LGM, approximately 20,000 years ago, massive ice sheets covered significant portions of the northern continents. This vast accumulation of ice led to a dramatic reduction in global sea levels, which were approximately 120 to 130 meters, 390 to 430 feet, lower than they are today. Consequently, enormous swathes of continental shelves, river deltas, and coastal plains which now lie submerged beneath our oceans were exposed and dry land. These exposed coastal regions would have represented exceptionally fertile and resource-rich environments. River systems would have extended much further, carving out vast, arable plains. The convergence of fresh water, abundant terrestrial flora and fauna, and easy access to diverse marine resources, fish, shellfish, marine mammals, would have created ideal conditions for thriving human settlements. It is a fundamental principle of human geography that early populations tended to concentrate along coastlines and river systems due to the availability of sustenance and ease of transport. If advanced cultures were indeed flourishing during this period, their primary centers of population and activity would logically have been situated on these now submerged coastlines. Therefore, finding their remains underwater, precisely where these discoveries are consistently being made, is not merely plausible but entirely expected, once this geological context is considered. This hypothesis directly conflicts with the prevailing out-of-Africa model, which, while accurately tracking early human migration, typically depicts these early migrants as nomadic hunter-gatherers, slowly developing agriculture and eventually forming settled communities and hierarchical societies only after the Holocene epoch began. The evidence from sites like Yonaguni, Dwarka, and the Gulf of Cambay, with their apparent urban planning, monumental architecture, and advanced construction techniques, suggests that human ingenuity and organizational capabilities may have developed far earlier and to a much greater extent than previously assumed. If these sites were indeed built by sophisticated societies, it implies a level of social organization, labor specialization, engineering knowledge, and possibly even a writing system or complex cultural practices that predate the traditionally accepted timeline for such developments by thousands of years. The very nature of a maritime civilization also implies sophisticated navigational skills and shipbuilding technology. To traverse the ancient oceans, engage in trade, or even migrate between continents when coastlines were vastly different, would have required robust vessels and a profound understanding of currents, stars, and cartography. The stone anchors found at Dwarka, for instance, indicative of large ships, provide a tantalizing glimpse into these early seafaring capabilities. If these civilizations were primarily maritime, their cultural exchange and technological diffusion could have occurred across vast oceanic distances, creating a potentially global network of interconnected societies rather than isolated pockets of development. The architectural similarities, such as the stepped pyramid forms suggested at Yonaguni, reminiscent of structures found in Mesoamerica, or the advanced stonework seen in Dwarka and other sites, might suggest shared knowledge, common builders, or a pervasive cultural influence that traversed oceans, potentially even challenging the traditional explanations for transoceanic cultural diffusion. The global synchronicity of these submerged discoveries is particularly striking. The fact that sites exhibiting similar characteristics and complex construction, from the coast of Japan to India to the Bahamas, all align with the end of the last glacial maximum sea level rise, is a powerful correlation. This isn't just about localized seismic events, but a global geological phenomenon that would have profoundly impacted all coastal populations. The rapid and massive inundation caused by melting ice sheets would have displaced countless communities, submerging their settlements and effectively erasing them from terrestrial memory. The gradual, yet punctuated, rise in sea levels over millennia would have slowly drowned these coastal cities, forcing populations inland, causing a cultural amnesia about their former coastal grandeur. Accepting the premise of a pre-glacial maritime civilization fundamentally shifts the focus of archaeological inquiry. Instead of exclusively concentrating on inland sites like the Mesopotamian plains or the Nile Valley, which are essentially refugee populations from the submerged coastal zones or those who lived in more marginal, non-coastal territories, archaeologists would need to turn their attention to the vast, largely unexplored expanse of the continental shelves. These areas, now underwater, represent the largest and potentially most resource-rich environments for ancient humans, and thus, the most likely locations for their most developed settlements. The current understanding of human development, which largely omits this vast submerged historical landscape, is inherently incomplete. Therefore, the argument for a pre-glacial maritime civilization is not simply about finding a few old ruins, it is about a radical re-evaluation of human capabilities, ingenuity, and social organization in the deep past. It demands a fundamental rethinking of when and where civilization truly began, and acknowledges that the greatest library of early human history may lie not in dusty desert sands, but in the silent, sediment-covered depths of our oceans, waiting for us to develop the courage and tools to read its submerged pages. This would not merely add a new chapter to human history, but necessitate a complete rewrite of the foundational understanding of our origins. Despite the mounting body of compelling evidence and the increasing sophistication of underwater archaeological techniques, the mainstream academic establishment largely persists in its skeptical stance, often dismissing these submerged ancient sites as natural formations, geological curiosities, or, at best, minor anomalies unworthy of serious re-evaluation of established historical paradigms. This profound resistance is deeply rooted in a phenomenon known as paradigm paralysis, an entrenched difficulty for established scientific frameworks and their practitioners to accommodate data that fundamentally contradicts their core assumptions and the edifice of knowledge built upon them. The implications of these submerged discoveries are not merely incremental, they are revolutionary, demanding nothing less than a complete overhaul of our understanding of human history. The current archaeological timeline, meticulously constructed over centuries through diligent excavation and comparative analysis, posits a relatively gradual progression of human development. This widely accepted narrative asserts that humanity evolved from nomadic hunter-gatherers, subsequently embracing agriculture around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago in regions like the Fertile Crescent, and only much later coalescing into settled communities, eventually giving rise to the first urban centers and monumental architecture in Mesopotamia and Egypt around 6,000 years ago. This linear progression, from primitive to sophisticated, forms the bedrock of historical education worldwide. Evidence of highly organized urban centers, complex engineering, and advanced construction techniques dating back 10,000 to 12,000 years, as suggested by sites like Yonaguni, Dwarka, and the Gulf of Cambay, does not merely challenge this narrative, it shatters it at its very foundations. The intellectual and professional consequences of acknowledging such findings are immense and deeply unsettling for the academic community. To accept the artificiality and antiquity of these submerged sites would necessitate a complete overhaul of textbooks, from primary school history to university-level archaeological curricula. It would invalidate countless academic papers, scholarly monographs, and professional conferences that have reinforced the orthodox chronology for decades. Furthermore, it would undermine the very careers and professional identities of legions of scholars, archaeologists, historians, and anthropologists who have dedicated their lives to building upon and defending the established framework. This is not simply an inconvenience, it represents a potential professional catastrophe for those whose expertise is deeply intertwined with the current paradigm. The human element of professional self-preservation and the comfort of intellectual familiarity cannot be underestimated in this resistance. Firstly, funding for unconventional research is notoriously scarce. Grants and institutional support tend to flow towards projects that reinforce existing paradigms or expand upon accepted knowledge. Research proposals that explicitly aim to challenge fundamental chronological frameworks are often met with skepticism, deemed too speculative or fringe, and consequently denied funding. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle where groundbreaking but paradigm-challenging research struggles to secure the resources necessary for thorough investigation. Secondly, peer-reviewed journals, the gatekeepers of scientific knowledge, are often reluctant to publish findings that overtly contradict established consensuses. While peer review is a vital mechanism for ensuring scientific rigor, it can also become a conservative force, prioritizing conformity over radical discovery. Papers supporting the early dates of sites like Dwarka have often faced an uphill battle for publication in prestigious journals, while those offering dismissive natural formation explanations find a more receptive audience, regardless of the strength of their counterarguments. This bias effectively marginalizes researchers who venture outside the accepted narrative, limiting their ability to disseminate their findings to a broader academic audience. Thirdly, scholars who champion these controversial sites and actively advocate for a re-evaluation of human history often face professional marginalization, ostracism, or even ridicule. They may be labeled as alternative archaeologists, pseudoscience proponents, or worse, accused of promoting sensationalist theories without sufficient evidence. This social and professional pressure acts as a powerful deterrent, discouraging many academics from engaging seriously with these sites for fear of jeopardizing their careers, tenure prospects, or professional reputation. The arguments advanced by mainstream geologists and archaeologists against the artificiality of these submerged sites often, ironically, strain credulity when examined closely. For Yonaguni, the argument of natural fracturing creating perfect right angles, parallel lines, and symmetrical stepped structures over vast areas requires a highly improbable series of coincidences. For Dwarka and the Gulf of Cambay, the dismissal of multiple, independently carbon-dated organic samples as contaminated or misinterpreted often lacks concrete alternative explanations or rigorous counter-analysis. The pattern of these criticisms reveals a prior determination to explain away rather than to investigate with an open mind. the default position becomes one of debunking, rather than a genuine curiosity driven by the scientific method's core principle, to follow the evidence wherever it leads. This intellectual conservatism, while sometimes serving as a necessary filter against spurious claims and promoting rigorous methodology, in this specific context, appears to be actively hindering genuine discovery and preventing a more accurate, complete understanding of human history. The institutional inertia is so powerful that revolutionary evidence, rather than being embraced as an opportunity for profound advancement, is often sidelined, ignored, or effectively buried, maintaining a comfortable, albeit incomplete, ignorance over uncomfortable truths that demand a wholesale re-evaluation. The result is a protracted stalemate, where the submerged cities lie silent, awaiting an academic shift in perspective that seems slow to arrive. The profound controversy swirling around submerged ancient sites has, perhaps inevitably, ignited intense public fascination and, concurrently, fueled a significant degree of speculative theory. The very concept of lost civilizations, Atlantis, pre-flood cultures, or even advanced ancient technology, taps into deep-seated human curiosities and universal archetypes far more potently than the dry, nuanced debates of academic archaeology. This broad public interest, while occasionally leading to unscientific conclusions and sensationalist narratives, plays a crucial and complex dual role in the ongoing discourse about these enigmatic underwater discoveries. On one hand, public fascination can act as a powerful catalyst for maintaining awareness and generating support for further research. When a discovery like the Bimini Road is made, or when news of the Gulf of Cambay city surfaces, it captures headlines and ignites imaginations across the globe. This widespread public engagement prevents these sites from being completely forgotten or deliberately suppressed. It creates a demand for information, often pushing media outlets to cover the stories, thereby keeping the scientific questions alive, even if the coverage is sometimes sensationalized. Divers, tourists, and enthusiasts flock to these sites, not only injecting economic resources into local economies but also acting as informal documentarians, sharing photos and videos that add to the public record, however informally. This sustained public attention can, at times, indirectly pressure academic institutions or governments to address the findings, even if initially met with skepticism. It provides a popular counter-narrative to the often conservative academic consensus, demonstrating that a significant portion of the public is open to and even desirous of a revised understanding of history. However, the downside of this unbridled public interest is equally significant and often problematic for rigorous scientific inquiry. The allure of the sensational often overshadows the meticulous, slow, and often unglamorous work of archaeology. The Atlantis connection, for instance, immediately attached to sites like Bimini Road and Yonaguni, while boosting public appeal, simultaneously triggers an automatic dismissal from mainstream academics. The association with mythical places or psychic predictions, like Edgar Case's for Bimini, can lead to these sites being relegated to the realm of pseudoscience or fringe archaeology by default, regardless of the empirical evidence presented. This makes it incredibly difficult for serious researchers, who may believe in the artificiality of a site but wish to maintain scientific rigor, to separate themselves from the more speculative elements that surround these discoveries. Furthermore, public speculation often jumps directly to conclusions such as ancient aliens, hyper-advanced antediluvian technology, or direct links to mythical continents without the necessary interim steps of careful excavation, dating, and contextual analysis. This can muddy the waters, making it challenging for the public to discern between well-substantiated evidence and imaginative extrapolations. It also creates a perception among mainstream academics that anyone investigating such sites is inherently unscientific, thereby reinforcing the paradigm paralysis discussed in the previous section. The media, often prioritizing clicks and engagement over factual accuracy, frequently exacerbates this problem by promoting sensationalist interpretations, further alienating academic researchers who value methodical and cautious claims. Treasure hunting and unregulated exploration represent another significant challenge. The mystique surrounding submerged ruins inevitably attracts individuals seeking artifacts or wealth, often without archaeological training or respect for the delicate context of a site. This can lead to the disturbance or destruction of invaluable archaeological evidence, making future scientific investigation exponentially more difficult or even impossible. The looting of artifacts, the unauthorized movement of stones, and the general disruption of stratigraphy erase crucial clues about a site's age, function, and the people who built it. This unregulated activity, unfortunately, thrives in the absence of official protection and systematic excavation, which is often withheld due to academic skepticism. Therefore, while public interest acts as a powerful advocate for these submerged histories, it also presents a double-edged sword. It keeps the questions alive but often complicates the scientific process. The challenge for proponents of these sites is to harness the genuine public curiosity in a responsible manner, encouraging critical thinking and the demand for sound evidence, rather than succumbing to the temptation of sensationalism. It highlights the need for a balanced approach, acknowledging the legitimate scientific questions raised by these sites while gently guiding public discourse towards evidence-based understanding, rather than allowing pure speculation to dominate the narrative and discredit the very discoveries themselves. Ultimately, it's a delicate dance between maintaining an open mind to revolutionary possibilities and adhering to the rigorous demands of scientific proof. The narrative of submerged ancient cities, once confined to the realm of myth and legend, has been demonstrably validated by groundbreaking discoveries across the globe. From the precisely carved terraces of Yonaguni to the expansive urban grid of the Gulf of Cambay, and from the enigmatic Bimini Road to the rediscovered Egyptian port of Heraklion, a consistent and compelling pattern emerges: major human settlements, some of startling complexity and antiquity, now lie beneath the waves. This reality compels us to look beyond terrestrial archaeology alone and embrace the vast, unexplored frontier of our oceans as the next great library of human history. The future of understanding our past fundamentally depends on our willingness to delve deeper, both literally and intellectually, into these submerged realms. The pace of discovery is only accelerating, driven by leaps in underwater imaging and mapping technologies. The next few decades will likely witness a surge in the identification of new sites. High-resolution multibeam sonar systems, coupled with artificial intelligence algorithms for pattern recognition, will enable the rapid scanning and initial identification of anomalous structures over vast areas of the continental shelves. Autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, operating for extended periods with minimal human intervention, will become the scouts of the deep, meticulously mapping and collecting data from areas previously deemed inaccessible or too expensive to explore. Machine learning will analyze vast datasets, identifying subtle patterns of construction that might elude the human eye, thereby revolutionizing the initial detection phase. Once identified, the documentation and excavation of these sites will also undergo transformative changes. Advanced photogrammetry and 3D modeling techniques will allow archaeologists to create incredibly detailed, millimeter-accurate virtual reconstructions of submerged ruins, even in challenging low-visibility conditions. These models will enable comprehensive study and analysis on land, reducing the need for extensive underwater presence and allowing for non-invasive virtual excavations. Robotics and specialized submersibles will become increasingly commonplace for precision sampling, delicate artifact recovery, and even the potential for in-situ conservation efforts, minimizing disturbance to these fragile underwater time capsules. Techniques for extracting and analyzing ancient DNA from submerged organic remains could even provide insights into the populations that inhabited these forgotten cities. However, the path forward is fraught with significant challenges. Funding remains a perennial obstacle. Underwater archaeology is inherently expensive, requiring specialized equipment, highly trained personnel, and substantial logistical support. Convincing governments and granting agencies to invest heavily in projects that challenge established historical narratives will continue to be an uphill battle, especially in countries where political or religious sensitivities might complicate the acceptance of such revolutionary findings. International collaboration will be crucial, pooling resources and expertise to tackle the enormous scale of potential discoveries. Establishing clear legal frameworks for the protection and management of these deep-sea heritage sites, often in international waters or disputed territories, will also be vital to prevent looting and ensure responsible research. Perhaps the most profound challenge, and indeed the greatest opportunity, lies in overcoming the entrenched paradigm paralysis within academia. The accumulation of undeniable evidence will eventually reach a critical mass, forcing a recalibration of our historical understanding. This will require a new generation of scholars who are open-minded, interdisciplinary, and willing to challenge long-held assumptions. It will involve a fundamental rebirth of history, a radical revision of textbooks, and a complete re-evaluation of human capabilities and societal complexity in the deep past. We will need to broaden our definitions of civilization to encompass non-agrarian or pre-agrarian societies that thrived along ancient coastlines. This new history will acknowledge a more fluid, dynamic, and geographically diverse development of human culture, with multiple centers of innovation emerging across the globe, long before the Mesopotamian and Egyptian models. The implications of this rebirth extend beyond mere academic curiosity. Acknowledging a deeper, richer human past, where sophisticated societies existed during the Ice Age, compels us to re-examine our own assumptions about progress, technological cycles, and humanity's resilience in the face of dramatic environmental change. What lessons can we learn from civilizations that were literally swallowed by rising seas? How did they adapt? What knowledge did they possess? These questions resonate profoundly in our current era of climate change and environmental uncertainty. The submerged cities are not just stones and ruins, they are silent witnesses to a forgotten era, guardians of a history that challenges us to be more humble, more curious, and more courageous in our pursuit of truth. They patiently wait, not for us to simply find them, but for us to possess the intellectual courage to accept what they represent. The future of underwater archaeology is not merely about discovering more sites, it is about rewriting the very narrative of human existence, finally acknowledging that our past is far more mysterious, magnificent, and ancient than we have ever dared to imagine.